Welcome to Uncensored Conservatism. This is episode 204, and today we're going to take a look at the 80-20 rule. And you probably heard of this in politics. If 80% of the people agree with it, it's almost suicidal politically to be in the 20%. Now, there are nuances to that rule, of course, and if you're this dolt, you could say any crazy ass thing you want, and you'd be reelected by the bleeding sheep in your district, or, even if you were this hobgoblin. Or maybe you'd win statewide because, you had like-minded morons in New York City to carry you to victory. So I was on X one day, and I saw this list, and I'm going to go through it to see where you stand. Are you in the 80 or the 20%? First up, trans women. That is, they have a dick and balls and they think they're a woman, competing in girls or women's sports. 80% of people don't think it should be allowed. Neither do I. You know why? Because we used to make fun of East German and Russian women who looked suspiciously male competing in the Olympics. We called it cheating. Today, that 20% in the minority is basically condoning cheating. There are absolute biological differences between males and females when it comes to endurance, body mass, and no amounts of hormones can totally overcome these biological facts. Also, I find it kind of strange that women who identify as a male don't compete in male sports. I mean, why is that? How come it's always some dude who wants to compete as a girl or a woman? Could the real female know she's at a physical disadvantage if they insisted on being on the college male football team? But I have a solution. Just make all sports co-ed, and when the real female bodies pile up, I'll be the first to say, told you so. Next up, abortion bans with no exceptions for rape, incest, or life of the mother. 80% oppose this. All right, a few thoughts here. First, incest and rape account for 0.3% of all abortions performed. Threat to maternal life accounts for another 2.5% of all abortions. So we're up to, 2.8%. There's another biggie there, and it's fetal abnormality, and that's at 1.3%. But 96.2% of abortions are simply for convenience, plain and simple. It would interfere with a career or her school or whatever excuse one can come up with. Third, it depends on what life of the mother means. If it means there's a high degree of probability that the mother will die if that child is carried to term for whatever reason, then I guess it's a choice that has to be made by the mother and the doctor. But having a baby will somehow affect the mother's mental health? That's not the life of the mother. And fourth, if you have some gynecological condition that prevents you from carrying a baby where your life could be in danger, then why did you get pregnant in the first place? I mean, there is surrogacy and there are adoption options out there. So this is a nuanced question, but I don't think there are too many conservatives who disagree with the exceptions. So moving along, border enforcement. 80% believe there should be better and stronger border enforcement. This may have been less than 80% a few years back when a pathway to citizenship, dreamers, or even some form of amnesty had a small chance of success. Unfortunately, these nitwits let the situation get out of hand so that now 80% believe there should be stronger border protection. And I venture that maybe not 80%, but certainly a majority believe that criminal illegals should be deported immediately. I also find it kind of interesting, and I can almost guarantee you that those in the 20% have a Ukrainian flag emoji somewhere because, Ukraine's borders were violated, but they're silent when our borders are violated. Next up, 2020 election denial, and of course this cohort downplaying January 6, 2021. Okay, as for the 2020 election, that's history, and it's bad history, as 4 years of Joe Biden has proven. Personally, I think Trump lost fair and square because the purported level of election fraud would not have changed the final outcome. And in 2024, this was one of my pet peeves against Trump. He just let it go. You were vindicated, okay? Just let it go. However, there's no doubt that some courts refused to even let any evidence be submitted, whether it was shoddy or not, and several state courts changed their election laws on the fly because of COVID in violation of their own state constitutions. If you have a law, you enforce it, whether there's a pandemic or not. As for January 6th and downplaying it, it's not downplaying it as much as it's getting a fucking grip. That was no insurrection, and this was no insurrection leader. Yes, some people were violent and fought with law enforcement, and they were held accountable when prosecuted. Nobody got raped that day, and Ashley Babbitt is the only death that I know of. So listen, if you're a Metro DC police officer or a Capitol police officer and you succumb to the stress of that day and later commit suicide, that's on you. Maybe you just chose the wrong line of work. I guess they thought their job was telling tourists not to touch a statue in the Capitol building. As I said, if that was an insurrection, it gives insurrections a bad name. At least the storming of the Bastille achieved something. Here, a vote was delayed a few hours while our elected leaders cowered under desks. And that's the reality of January 6th. Next, 80% of people do not believe we should defund the police or eliminate cash bail. These crazy ideas started during the mostly peaceful George Floyd riots of 2020. Now, something like 22 major cities either reallocated, cut, or froze police funding in the aftermath. In most cases, these cities showed increases in violent crime, but in those with declining violent crime, they showed increases in property crimes. Yeah, it's not a great idea, so sorry, honey. Go back to St. Louis ghettos and the rock you crawled out from under. Did you know that 75 to 85% of people oppose book bans? I mean, who would have thunk that in a country with a First Amendment? So no conservative I know is for banning books. However, restricting books by age appropriateness, yeah, that's with children. That's certainly true. And like the internet had to block out this book that's available to kids. So one of the funniest things I ever saw was when Ron DeSantis was giving a press conference on the so-called book ban in Florida, when he began to show and read from a book. CNN and MSNBC had to cut away lest they run afoul of the FCC decency rules. So let's follow that logic. It's indecent to read or show on network television, but decent to allow an 8-year-old access to this book. By that logic, every school kid should get a year's subscription to Penthouse. Book bans? No. Age-appropriate material? Yes. They're two different things that the left likes to lump into one. 80% of people oppose late-term abortions, defined as after 24 weeks. So then why are they still performed? Why are they still permissible in several states? Simple. There's money to be made from abortion. Oh. And Black and Hispanic babies to kill, to keep the populations of those people down, right? Planned Parenthood? Relatedly, 65 to 85% of people oppose a nationwide abortion ban. I wholeheartedly agree. It's what I thought this guy determined with the Dobbs decision, returning it to the states. Yeah, some states will have liberal laws and others will have quite conservative laws, but the good thing about laws are that they can be repealed or amended as the situation demands. In fact, the federal government should get out of the abortion thing altogether and stop providing any money to the largest provider of abortion in this country, Planned Parenthood. That is, unless you like killing Black and Hispanic babies, just to keep their population down, right? 75 to 80% of people oppose race-based college admissions. Should be a no-brainer. Colleges at one time were reserved for our best and our brightest, and yes, I know that someone with a college education can expect a higher earnings over their lifetime. But let's face reality here. For whatever reason, some people are not cut out for college. They could learn a trade or whatever and become a functional member of society and the economy. So the question becomes whether we should make up for perhaps former racial prejudice by lowering the bar for college admissions and allowing people in based on their skin color. And it seems rather contradictory to what this country is supposed to be about. But we can address why, for example, blacks score low on SATs and such, and maybe work to address those issues. But that's a whole other can of worms. The whole idea is based on the belief that a racially diverse student body in colleges enhances the educational experience. Really? Does it? Says who? College professors? It seems that since black students are now demanding segregated dorms and graduation ceremonies, we might want to rethink that diversity is our strength thing. Anyway, moving along. 85% oppose cuts to Medicare or Social Security. Okay, I can see it, but I can also see both programs needing some reform. Social Security is considered the third rail in politics. You just don't touch it. But if you don't reform it, then it's nothing more than a huge Ponzi scheme when you get down to it. Social Security was never intended to be the be-all and end-all means of retirement income, and this guy who signed it into legislation even said so. As for Medicare, again, reform, and I wonder how people would respond if those were the questions. 80% of people oppose gender-affirming care for minors. Okay, I'm in that 80% there. Listen, if you're like 18 or 21 and you want to lop off your tits or balls or pump yourself full of hormones, go for it. You can even prance around in Times Square and show up on red carpets if you want. But don't expect me to approve of a mental disorder, and don't expect me to pay for your transition. At the least, it's child abuse by parents and doctors who go along with this shit, and it's genital mutilation at worst. Okay, next, this is a biggie because 90% of people oppose restrictions on access to contraception. So a few thoughts here. First, a pregnancy prevented is one less baby aborted. So, point for contraception there. Second, if you're a liberal and speaking as an unabashed conservative, I want you to use contraception. I do not want you to breed. Third, well, it depends on your definition of contraception. If it's to prevent conception with a high degree of confidence, then no problem. If it's to kill and expel something after conception, well, that's not contraception, folks. That's an abortifacient, so no. By the way, and don't expect my tax dollars to pay for your birth control unless you're a registered Democrat or a declared liberal. And I am willing, as a conservative, to oppose restrictions on contraception access if you recognize that some employers have deeply held religious beliefs that oppose contraception and should not be forced to violate those beliefs. Okay, this is a weird one. 80% oppose the decriminalization of hard drugs like heroin and fentanyl, which makes me wonder, who the hell's in that 20%? Anyway, moving along. 90% of people support universal background checks for the purchase of a firearm. Now, one supposes they're talking about the so-called gun show loophole and the private transfer of guns from like a father to a son. In reality, they're one and the same. The gun show loophole simply applies to all private firearm transactions. Obviously, there are background checks if you buy from a licensed dealer, and this universal check system would submit every private seller of a firearm to the system. And I suppose there are ways to implement it, but, maybe the private seller can go to a licensed one to do the background check, but did a background check stop Stephen Paddock from buying scores of guns and killing 58 people in Vegas? And would a background check have prevented Thomas Crooks from shooting at Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania? And if a background check determines you're ineligible to buy a gun, what does the seller do? They say, sorry, I can't sell it to you. They don't call the cops and say, hey, listen, this guy was just in my store trying to purchase a gun. So it sounds good on paper, but it likely sucks in practice, and it increases the cost anywhere from $60 to $200 in areas that require these checks. Washington, D.C. requires universal background checks, and they have a high gun violence rate, so enough said. 80% oppose non-citizens voting. If so, then Democrats should have no problem with this, voter ID laws, but they do. Why? Whatever. 80% of people believe in climate change, okay? As a conservative, I also believe in climate change because we have a record in paleontology to show that the Earth goes through cycles, always has and always will. But if there is this recent warming trend, which I think is still debatable, the next thing is, what do we do about it? And are humans even the cause of it? What would happen if we stopped using anything that produces carbon dioxide for the next 10 years? What then? Will the Earth cool off suddenly? Will we complain about the impending ice age? And while we're at it, we have a solution, and it's called nuclear energy, but that's also off the table to the climate freaks. It's not an existential crisis, as this autistic Swedish little bitch says. See, here you go. Greta Thunberg. There's an example why liberals should have access to contraception. Climate change as a natural function of the Earth, yes. The climate freak solution, go to hell. 65 to 80% oppose tax cuts for the wealthy. This is just some jargon left over from Occupy Wall Street. It makes for a good line from this goofball from Vermont who's surprisingly in the 1%, even though he's a senator. Capitalism's been very, very good to Bernie. I can show you statistic after statistic after statistic that shows that the wealthy pay their fair share, but I'll spare you. Sounds good. It's just a slogan. And finally, 7 to 85% believe the minimum wage should be raised, and they support paid family leave. All right, I can find no instance where raising the minimum wage has lifted a single soul out of poverty. But I can find many instances of businesses cutting back on employee hours, if they even keep the employee in the first place, or keep their doors open. Regardless, states have minimum wage laws that are considerably higher than the federal minimum wage, so I don't know what raising the federal rate will do. And paying someone $20 an hour to say, you want fries with that, seems just a little weird. As for paid family leave, the devil's in the details, and I agree with it in principle. For instance, I think that the accumulation of paid time off in lieu of overtime pay is a possibility. You know, like instead of paying someone time and a half for working overtime, they get 1.5 hours of paid time off at their convenience, in addition to accumulated vacation time. Anyway, that's it. See where you fall, 80 or 20. And that's it. Have a great day and a more pleasant tomorrow.